I would love for you to share more of your career journey with the group, and also what have been some of those key turning points in your career?
I went to UC Berkeley as undergrad from Los Angeles. So I moved up to the Bay Area. And I kind of had this thought that I was going to be a doctor initially. I would say probably like the
Mm-hmm.
first 6 months of freshman year. I thought my sister, who's older, was already on that path, and she is currently a maternal fetal medicine today. And so I thought that that was sort of what I wanted to do. But I realized very quickly that I did not like biology in college and organic chemistry as much as I probably needed to pursue that path. But I think what going to such a big school like UC Berkeley enabled me to discover is that there were just endless possibilities that I didn't really have exposure to growing up in an Indian family that where we were so focused on very particular paths. And so I started to learn the value of using a liberal arts education, not necessarily knowing what I was going to do, but gaining the skill sets to enable me to succeed in whatever I do. So critical
Mm-hmm.
thinking, uh, problem solving. And that was a little scary to me because when I realized that I didn't want to be a doctor, it was almost overwhelming at what the possibilities are, right? People say, oh, you're in
Yeah.
business. What is business? I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many things and there isn't. I think that's oftentimes why it's easier in some ways to say I want to be a doctor. And of course, there's endless choices inside of there, but it starts to put you on a track. And I'm a very structured person. So kind of making that decision to not do that was sort of that first big point early on that I didn't realize that really shaped my career. And so I know we don't have that much time together, so I'll try to make this brief, but the first decision that I don't know was intentional, but it definitely shaped my career was coming out of undergrad. I joined a program called the Marketing Leadership Development Program with Johnson and Johnson, but it was basically this cross-functional and development program where I got to have exposure to all aspects of business. So
Mm.
starting with it was a marketing leadership development program, but it was traditional brand management at the time, so which has changed a lot over the last 25 years.
Yeah.
But learning how to launch products, how to think about what the consumer needs, how to run it, how to manage a P&L. At that point in time, it was just a contribution margin. I wasn't sort of figuring out how we were turning on the lights and how that was going to affect bottom line, but
Yeah.
really responsible for that, learning what it meant to forecast, working with sales, operations,
Mhm.
understanding manufacturing. I mean, this at the age of 21 was sort of a ticket for me.
How did you go from brand management, CPG, now into media, right? How did you meet Shonda, right? What led you to join Shondaland?
Yes. So we go to this conference every year, and it's called the Allen and Company Conference in Sun Valley, Idaho. And it's a wonderful conference that's tech and media.
Mm.
And it's almost like summer camp at times for adults because by going every summer, you see oftentimes pretty much the same people. You have amazing conversations that sort of pick up year after year. And so at this conference, I got to know this wonderful man named Chris Silverman. And we had gotten to know each other years prior, but I was always sort of working and busy. And we get back and he says, oh, I know you were living in Italy. What are you going to be doing now? And I talked to him a little bit about my background again and reminded him. And we just were having this great conversation over a glass of wine. And he said to me, he said, would you ever be interested in helping me in what I do? And and I was like, remind me what you do. And he said, I'm an agent, like a Hollywood agent. And I kind of smiled. I'm like, what? So I'm just like kind of take a sip of my wine. I'm like, oh, I'd love to help you. Like with what? And he said to me, which was really interesting, he said, the folks that I represent today, it's changed over the last, he said, at that time, this was about 3 years ago. So arguably really over the last like 5 years, but celebrities and folks that are sort of famous are in the business of building personal brands. And
Mm.
he said, it's not just about sort of what they do and being famous, it's about creating a brand. And then from their personal brand comes products, experiences, services. And he said, what's happening is it's such a creative industry that the acumen and the business acumen, largely speaking, isn't there. And so what he felt like he was experiencing is the agents then sort of end up being these CEOs of their
Yeah.
clients' brands. And he's like, I can get them so far and my team can get them so far, but that's not also our wheelhouse and what we do. And so I thought it was pretty brilliant of him to sort of see this opportunity of melding worlds, like the businessy world with the creative world, to bring in some of these fundamentals, processes, and structures. I met with Shonda first over Zoom, and we kind of had a mind melt. You know, we had a very, very similar view of the world. What was hard for me is even through my conversation with her and the little that I could the little that I could find online, I couldn't quite figure out what I was still supposed to be coming in to do. So that was stressful. But I thought to myself, and this goes to your question of like, how did I get into media? I thought to myself, you know what? If I'm going to put the jersey back on, because I had sort of been semi-retired, taken a break, really enjoying sort of spending time with my children who were at an age where I was enjoying having the conversations and being around a little bit more. So I thought if I'm going to put the jersey back on and go into an operating role, I need to feel a little bit nervous. I don't know if going back into a CPG, and I wouldn't have said this had when I was in Italy or even leaving for
Mm.
Italy, but I realized that it's good to feel uncomfortable. It's good to feel, or for me, I felt like that was what I wanted to do. So sort of going into a whole industry was scary. And
Mm.
as someone who was very confident in her abilities in the CPG world, I liked the idea that I didn't have that going into this. But what I needed to be confident on goes back to my liberal arts education in from Berkeley is how do I think? I'm a
Mm-hmm.
problem solver. Um, how do I draw parallels from the lives that I had lived, the industries that I had seen? It has to be doable. You all are amazing because that's what you do every day. You get to see so many things across industries, but I hadn't been doing that. And so you all know very well that like sometimes it's like families. I always say like same lives, different houses. It was scary to go in, but once I went in, I realized the widget was different, but there are a lot of similarities across the
Mm-hmm.
board. Maybe how we talk
Mm-hmm.
about it was different. Um, so that's kind of how I made personally the decision to go in.
So obviously with Shonda being such a cultural leader is the mission, right? And the mission at Shondaland is so important. And we see how groundbreaking she's been in really promoting DEI in media. You know,
Yes.
how does Shondaland stay committed to that, right? How do you see your role in really supporting that mission?
And my responsibility, you know, you would ask that, what do I, you know, what I uphold? I, you know, she's the cultural touchstone. And so my role in the process and Shondaland, and I am a very small, you know, dot in this painting, but I really view my responsibility to in order to enable Shonda to be the cultural touchstone and keep us moving forward, my responsibility is to help run the company in a way that allows her to have the space to do that,
Mm-hmm.
as well as ensure that the way we are internally, we're about 65, 60 people, that we are upholding those values as a company on a day-to-day basis in the way in which we work, how we work together, so that we are representing the brand and her. She's obviously the
Yeah.
Shonda in the Shondaland. We always joke. I'm like,
Yeah.
when we're having a challenging day, some of us joke is like, well, it's not called Megaland, so can't really help you there. Or like my friend, my
Yeah.
CMO is like, it's not Chris Land, or, you know. So we just joke. We're like, it is Shondaland. So we have to make sure that we are doing the things that we can to enable her to have the space to be creative and to tell stories.
It sounds like you guys are doing more at Shondaland on how do you do that as well. But what are other, any other reflections on that that, you would share with the group?
I think there's one thing that I feel is really important, and I think all of us can do this, and that is, you know, yes, we can create programs, but there's so much impact that we can have as individuals. So I make it
Yeah.
a point to reach out to those that are more junior in their careers and really just, it's no different than mentorship, but I do pay a certain lens to not just people who look like any minority, to make sure that where I can, I open doors, even if it's one person that I can change, or career I can help. It doesn't always have to come in a big program. And so that's one thing I feel is a huge sense of responsibility and truly my duty, because there are those that have done that for me. And the more we do that over time, as women, as minorities, I do believe there'll be this, it's not linear. I do think it's non-linear, and there'll be a compounded effect.
I'm glad you highlighted those, because, one of the things that we often talk about, right, is the bamboo ceiling within our network, right? And a lot of it is you don't ever get that access or that chance, and so you can't, you're always sort of stuck in this entry middle management level. And so I'm curious, obviously you have personally very, very much broken that ceiling, and it sounds like you guys are doing more at Shondaland on how do you do that as well. But what are other, any other reflections on that you would share with the group?
It took me a while to learn that I need to champion myself. And that doesn't mean not being respectful. That doesn't mean that I don't have to work hard. It just means there's a way to do it that champions yourself. And partly that's also being a female, having sort of conversations that I would feel were uncomfortable, but really others were having them for themselves, and just being an advocate for yourself. And in that took me a little while, I would say. And it's still hard for me to do. And I wonder if that's part female, part cultural, but I do think there is that component a little bit that has shaped me, and something that I look back and said, hey, maybe I could have had some conversations when I was younger. And it just means sort of demanding, like, why am I not getting this? Where am I getting this? It's just a seeking an understanding and being an advocate for yourself. I talked a little bit in the beginning about a ladder versus a jungle gym. And the one thing that I would love to impart is embracing this notion that your life and your career is more like a jungle gym than a ladder. And I didn't really embrace that or understand that until recently, in the last, 5 to 8 years, I would say. And the reason why I think that's important to impart is because sometimes we feel the pressure that the decisions that we're making in the moment are all equally big, and that if we make the wrong decision, perhaps it may lead to not an ideal outcome in our career. But what I've realized over time is that and this is where the jungle gym analogy comes in, it's not always a straight line. Sometimes you do have to swing back and then skip a rung to move forward. Sometimes you have to swing side to side. But having a vision of where you want to go, Jeff Bezos has an amazing quote that I really live by: stubborn on vision, flexible on details. I think you have to have a vision of where you want to go, give yourself grace, as that will change over time. Or it may look a little bit different, but really embracing and taking the pressure off of it has to be a certain way, success looks a certain way, because your personal life will come in, whatever that may be. For me, it was getting married, having children that led to some swinging to other rings. For others, it might be, it may look very different. It just might be, a move that someone needs to make. It could just be other things that are going on. It doesn't always have to be about, kids and family. But I would say that, really embracing that is something I wish I had understood a little bit better and internalized earlier in my career.